The wind whipped across the cemetery, carrying a cold, biting chill that seemed to seep into the billionaire's bones. He stood before the marble gravestone, its surface polished and gleaming despite the gray sky above. The name engraved there, his son's name, seemed to stare back at him, a reminder of laughter lost, birthdays missed, and a future that would never come. He pressed his palm against the cool stone, feeling a pang of emptiness he had long tried to bury beneath board meetings, contracts, and global ventures. A soft, uneven sob broke the silence. At first, he thought it was his imagination, a trick of grief magnifying every sound. Then he noticed her, a small figure crouched near the edge of the grave, shoulders shaking violently, hair tangled and dust-covered, eyes red and swollen from crying. She clutched a small, worn notebook to her chest as though it were her only anchor to a world that had abandoned her. He took a cautious step closer. "Hey." His voice was gentle, almost tentative. He wasn't used to soft words. His life had always been about commands and control, but somehow, it felt right here, in the presence of someone else's sorrow. The girl flinched at the sound, pressing the notebook tighter to her chest. "Go away," she whispered, voice trembling. There was fear there, raw and palpable, but also something deeper, loneliness, desperation, a silent cry for help she didn't dare voice. He knelt a careful distance away, not wanting to startle her further. "I won't hurt you. I just noticed you were upset," he said. "You don't have to be alone." Her eyes darted to him, searching, skeptical, trying to measure the weight of his words. She was small, but her gaze was piercing, filled with a mixture of defiance and despair. Finally, she spoke, voice barely audible. Why do you care?" The billionaire was taken aback. No one had asked him that in years, not genuinely. He stared at her, seeing a reflection of pain he knew all too well. "Because, sometimes, someone should," he replied softly. There was no charm in his words, no attempt to impress or influence, just an honesty that felt almost fragile in the cold cemetery air. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through the bare trees, mingling with the girl's quiet sniffles. Slowly, she lowered the notebook slightly, as if testing the waters, allowing him to exist in her space without fear. And for the first time in months, the billionaire felt a flicker of connection, a bridge forming between two lives shaped by loss. The first few days after their encounter at the grave were quiet. The billionaire made sure she had a safe place to stay, a modest room in his sprawling estate, simple but warm, away from the cold streets that had been her home. At first, she was hesitant to speak. Her small hands fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve, and her eyes constantly scanned the edges of the room, expecting disappointment, anger, or rejection. But slowly, through patient gestures and gentle words, the wall she had built around herself began to crack. The billionaire didn't push. He didn't ask her to recount every sorrow at once. He simply sat nearby, a silent presence, letting her know that someone was willing to listen. One rainy afternoon, as the wind rattled the windows and the sky wept over the city, she finally opened the notebook she had clutched at the grave. Its pages were filled with crooked handwriting, doodles, and fragments of thoughts that were sometimes sharp with anger, sometimes soft with longing. "My mom. She lost her job," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then my dad. He just left." Her lips trembled. "I don't know why. I don't know what I did wrong." The billionaire leaned in, offering no judgment, no platitudes, just his attention. "It wasn't your fault," he said softly. His words were simple, but they carried a weight of sincerity that only someone who had lost deeply could convey. "You didn't do anything wrong." Tears welled in her eyes. She had been carrying the weight of guilt and abandonment for years, thinking she had somehow caused the unraveling of her world. But here was a man, a stranger, telling her otherwise. I come here sometimes," she admitted, her voice quivering. "To the cemetery, to his grave. He always made me feel safe. Even though I didn't know him. I don't have anyone else." The billionaire's chest tightened. He knew grief intimately. Losing a child, losing someone who defined your life, it left a void that nothing could fill. And yet, here was this little girl, sitting in that same void, seeking comfort in a place meant for mourning. "I understand," he said finally. "And you don't have to be alone anymore. Not if you don't want to be." For the first time, she looked at him without suspicion, the beginnings of trust flickering in her eyes. It was fragile, delicate, like a flame in the wind, but it was real. And in that moment, the billionaire realized that sometimes, helping someone else heal also healed the emptiness inside yourself. Weeks passed, and the initial awkwardness between them slowly gave way to something warmer, something neither of them had expected. The little girl had begun to settle into the vast, unfamiliar spaces of the billionaire's estate, her small feet padding quietly along polished marble floors, her eyes wide with wonder at paintings, books, and luxuries she had never imagined. Yet, despite the grandeur, she felt safe, not overwhelmed, but protected. The billionaire, too, had changed in subtle ways. His sharp, calculating demeanor softened around her. In meetings, he found himself distracted, imagining the stories he could tell her about far-off places and people, wondering what small joys she might find in a world so different from her own. The laughter that had long been absent from his life returned slowly, sparked by her clumsy attempts at baking in his kitchen or the imaginative games they played in the gardens. He arranged tutors to help her catch up in school, knowing how easily a bright mind could be stunted by hardship. He hired therapists to help her process the pain that had haunted her young life, understanding that love and security alone weren't enough to erase trauma. Slowly, layer by layer, he rebuilt her world. And in doing so, he rebuilt parts of himself he had long thought lost. One afternoon, while walking through the estate's private gardens, she stumbled upon a patch of wildflowers. Kneeling, she picked a small bouquet, and with a shy smile, handed it to him. "For you," she said. I thought he'd like these too." He accepted the flowers, his fingers brushing hers, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through him. "Thank you," he said softly, emotion catching in his throat. He would have loved them. "And I'm glad you like them too." Their days settled into a comforting rhythm. Breakfasts in sunlit dining rooms, afternoons filled with lessons and laughter, quiet evenings where he read to her or listened to her recount the small adventures of her day. All of it stitched together a bond that neither had anticipated, a thread of hope and love where despair had once ruled. The billionaire watched her grow, not just in skill and knowledge, but in confidence and joy. Her eyes, once dull with sorrow, now sparkled with curiosity. Her smiles became frequent, genuine, and radiant, and in her, he found a reflection of resilience he had long admired but never fully understood, the ability to rise from grief, to find light even in the darkest corners. In that quiet and spoken way, they became family, not by blood, not by obligation, but by shared understanding, trust, and the quiet, profound magic of someone believing in you when the world had not. Months had passed since that first encounter at the cemetery, and the little girl who once clutched a tattered notebook in despair was almost unrecognizable, not in appearance, but in spirit. Her laughter now echoed through the halls of the billionaire's estate, bright and unrestrained, a sound that had once seemed impossible in a life shadowed by loss. She had discovered talents that had lain dormant: painting, music, storytelling. Every stroke of a brush, every note played on the piano, was a celebration of survival, resilience, and hope. The billionaire watched quietly as she grew into herself. He had provided tutors, therapy, and a safe home, but he had given her something more intangible: the belief that she mattered, that her life was worth cherishing. And in return, she had begun to heal a wound he had carried silently for years, the gaping hole left by his son's death. One crisp afternoon, the little girl asked to return to the cemetery. The billionaire, though hesitant, understood. It was her choice, her journey, and he would accompany her, not as a protector this time, but as a companion. She knelt by the gravestone, carefully placing a handmade flower arrangement she had created herself. Her small hands trembled slightly, but there was a serenity in her movements, a quiet reverence that spoke of understanding and acceptance. "Thank you," she whispered, more to the universe than anyone else, though he felt the words were meant for him as well. "For helping me, for believing in me." The billionaire knelt beside her, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and fulfillment. The pain of loss would never completely fade, but it had softened, replaced by connection, gratitude, and love. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You've done more than you know," he said. "And I've learned from you too." Together, they stood in silence, gazing at the gravestone. The wind had softened, and the sun peeked through the clouds, casting a gentle glow over the cemetery. In that light, two lives once broken by tragedy now shared a quiet harmony. From the girl's perspective, the world no longer seemed cruel and indifferent. From the billionaire's perspective, the emptiness that had shadowed his heart for years had begun to fill, not with wealth or power, but with something far rarer: love, trust, and the unspoken bond of a family chosen through care, patience, and understanding. Their lives had intertwined, two souls shaped by grief, now finding strength in each other. And in the midst of loss, they had discovered hope, proving that even in the darkest moments, life had a way of offering second chances, and that healing could bloom where pain had once lived.